Let's dig into how this Trump cabinet is shaping up. I want to welcome in MSNBC political analyst Hugh Hewitt. He's host of the Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network. Hugh, nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm great, Kate. Happy Thanksgiving week to you.
To you, too. I hope you get a little time off a little later this week. Feels like we've been going and going. Interesting story over the weekend as we talk about the potential people that he's considering for Secretary of State. And it really looks like Rudy Giuliani and Mitt Romney reportedly might be two of the top contenders. In fact, Trump even acknowledged as much when he came out over the weekend. They're very different people with very different worldviews. What do you make of those two potential cabinet members?
I think the president-elect's doing a very smart thing in reaching out to all sorts of different people, including his allies from the campaign, opponents in the campaign, whether Rick Perry, who was there today, or Governor Romney, who was there on Sunday, or to Democrats like today, and indeed loyalists who have been up and down. And I think it's important he's talking to nonpartisans like General Mattis. I hope he talks to General Allen, General McChrystal in regards to the Department of Homeland Security, which is we had 7 people arrested in France today for plotting a terrorist attack. DHS is probably the one job where you really do want a nonpartisan person with extraordinary skill set. So it's a complicated business. There are about 40 key appointments. I think the president-elect is surprising a lot of people with his thoroughness, but also with his speed. He's far ahead of where President Obama was 8 years ago, and where, of course, George W. Bush was locked into the Florida recount 16 years ago. So I'm pleased with the way it's developing.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of today's names. We just mentioned a couple of them, but you mentioned Rick Perry, the former Texas governor, is there today. The former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, Newt Gingrich, the former Labor Elaine Chao under George W. Bush. Some of these folks are really establishment types. Do you think he's just seeking advice from people, or is he considering everybody you see on the screen for a position?
I'm not in the room, and so all I can do is speculate, but my speculation is that he values expertise. I did study his business dealings for the preparation for all the debates and interviews I did through 2015 and 2016 with him. He is a great believer in expertise, and he does tend to bring in the very best in this and the very best in that when putting together a project team, and that has been lived out through his entire business experience. So the longer he keeps digging into people like General Mattis and Mitt Romney, the happier I think patriots ought to become, because the government needs expertise. It doesn't just need friends of friends and somebody knew back in college. You need folks who have the resume and the skill set, actual real-world experience, especially when it comes to the wars, when it comes to dealing with hostile nations or peer competitor nations, and especially with ISIS and Iran. You need some folks who are deep into specific knowledge about the adversaries that we're confronting.
Getting some attention this afternoon, Kris Kobach, the Secretary of State from Kansas, who's been really intimately involved in immigration issues in this country, written up a lot of the more controversial laws. There's a picture of him walking into the meeting at Trump Tower, and people are actually zooming in on the document that he's carrying, Hugh. I don't know if you've seen that photo yet. It just came out a little while ago. But this is a guy who really has some very strong feelings about immigration. Could he be under consideration, do you think, for Homeland Security or something in that vein?
He's been on a list for DHS, and he is, in fact, an expert on the law with regards to immigration and naturalization, which would make him a candidate for the ICE position. DHS a little bit different. That requires cybersecurity. It requires clearances. It requires a depth of background in the threats that array around the United States. The one thing that would be destructive of the administration, because it would be destructive of America, is a massive attack on America from abroad, either cyber or physical. And therefore you think to yourself, maybe a lawyer isn't the best person for DHS in the way that Andy Puzder, for example, named Tip for Labor, the head of CKE, which is Carl's Jr.'s and Hardee's, both a lawyer and a businessman would be good for a Labor Department. Or John Bolton would be good for state or the United States Trade Representative. Or there are all sorts of lists. What I think he is going to do is assess, and I keep using the term skill set. What do you need to do this? He's built a lot of big buildings and projects, and those have all required, whether it's architects, whether it's land planners, down to landscape planning. He knows that you need a different palette of abilities for every specific job you've got to fill.
A lot of the folks that we're showing on screen happen to be white males, and that's getting some attention as well. Kellyanne Conway spoke about this on CNBC a little while ago. Take a listen to what she said about the cabinet.
We're impervious to the criticism and naysayers when you are in the insults, when you're in Trump world. But number two, and most importantly, you have to be qualified and capable to do this job. That's criteria number one. It's not, how do I make this a mosaic of America? That will happen naturally.
So her point is it'll happen naturally, that it'll become a mosaic of America. You don't have to sort of go off of what people's backgrounds are and ethnicities. They're making the case that they're just choosing the most qualified people. Do you agree with that approach, or does that risk not being inclusive enough in a country like ours?
I personally don't care if he has a cabinet of all females or all African-American or all everything. If he shows up with Rick Grinnell, who's a gay American at the United Nations, if he shows up with Will Hurd, who's a 9-year veteran of the CIA and a 2-term congressman from Texas in a national security position, or Kelly Ayotte, former senator from New Hampshire, still senator, but won't be a senator come February, or KT McFarland, who's a veteran of the national security establishment, I won't mind. If it's Nikki Haley at USTR Commerce, I won't mind. It matters to me, and I think it will turn out, that the cabinet be unimpeachable when it comes to expertise with what is required at the top. And thus far, you go back to that Romney meeting and you go back to the Mattis meeting, and if I were picking a cabinet, I'd start with those 2 people at the top of any list, and I've named everybody else who's on my short list for all sorts of great things. You look at EPA and you think about the Attorney General of Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt. He's a white male. But on the other hand, you've got Pam Biondi from down in Florida who could do the job as well. There are all sorts of people in America who are talented. Donald Trump's looking for the very best, top 40 or 50 for those positions that he just got to get right, especially Treasury, Defense, Secretary of State, and Homeland Security. He's already named his AG, of course.
Talk Radio's Hugh Hewitt. Always great to get your perspective, Hugh. Thanks so much.